You assume driving a luxury car forces people to respect your status. In his 1992 autobiography, Made in America, retail founder Sam Walton drives a rusted red pickup truck through a quiet town. The heavy truck has scratched paint and a cracked leather seat. He wears a cheap baseball cap and thick work boots. He parks in the crowded public lot like a common laborer. He holds absolute control over the massive American supply chain.
This performance of poverty is not a historical quirk. It is a deliberate mechanism running right above your head today. You felt the trap last Friday when you bought an expensive coffee to hold during a corporate meeting. You wanted the client to see the expensive cardboard cup and assume you possessed massive resources. The gray man theory is the exact psychological tool the elite use to remain untouchable in plain sight. Vanity is a heavy tax.
The cheap truck was a brilliant decoy for the open road. The visible dirt deflected the common thieves looking for a quick score. Surviving the apex predators inside the dark financial district required wearing an even darker disguise. The true elite understand that the human brain stops processing information the moment it feels pity. They weaponize the pity of the crowd to execute their massive trades in absolute silence. They build a fortress out of dirty rags.
In her 2012 book, The Richest Woman in America, Janet Wallach describes Hetty Green walking through the freezing streets of New York. She wears a faded black dress that drags in the cold mud. She carries her lunch in a cheap tin pail. She controls millions of dollars in railroad stocks and heavy government bonds. She sits on wooden benches to read the financial newspaper in the cold wind. She refuses to turn on the heat.
Think of two people negotiating a heavy real estate contract. One wears a custom suit and a heavy gold watch. The other wears cheap denim and scuffed shoes. The seller assumes the man in the suit has infinite cash and refuses to lower the massive price. The seller pities the man in the scuffed shoes and offers a heavy discount. The invisible man buys the massive building at a fraction of the cost. The ego pays a massive premium.
You ignored this protective shield last month. At a quiet family dinner, you mentioned your salary increase and watched the eyes of your relatives change in the warm light. A cousin pulled you aside and asked for a heavy loan. You painted a massive target on your back to buy a cheap moment of pride. Hiding the gold works for an entire lifetime. Shielding a massive dynasty requires hiding the map. Display is a tax on wealth.
Wearing dirty clothes protects the individual operator from the street-level predators. When the capital grows into the millions, the legal system replaces the street thief. The state uses complex lawsuits and heavy taxes to drain the unprotected vault. The gray man steps out of the physical world and begins operating through a dense network of invisible paper shields. He replaces his physical body with a stack of corporate documents. The ghost enters the heavy machine.
In his 2009 book, The First Tycoon, T.J. Stiles details how Cornelius Vanderbilt controls the massive shipping lanes of New York Harbor. He builds a massive empire of heavy steamboats and iron trains. He does not put his personal name on the heavy contracts. He operates a network of quiet holding companies and invisible paper proxies. He moves the heavy chess pieces from a dark room while his competitors fight for public glory in the newspapers. Think of two business owners facing a massive legal disaster. One puts his real name on the company sign and signs every heavy document. The other hires a quiet proxy to hold the paper title. When the heavy lawsuit hits, the proud owner loses his entire personal savings and his family home. The invisible owner watches the hollow corporate shell absorb the legal blow. The heavy storm destroys the proud oak tree. The ghost survives the heavy storm.
You left a massive trail of personal data last week. when you launched a small digital business. You registered the domain with your own name and posted your home address on the public contact page. You traded your absolute privacy for a tiny drop of public fame. You built a glass house in a stone-throwing contest. Operating through paper shields deflects the legal arrows. The proxy protects the quiet king. Transparency is a quiet trap.
Using a paper proxy shields the bank account from the heavy gavel of the judge. The paper cannot protect the physical body from the crushing weight of public attention. When a man achieves extreme financial power, the crowd demands to consume his daily life as cheap entertainment. The spotlight forces the titan to alter his natural movements. The final evolution of the gray man requires the complete annihilation of the public persona. The stage must be abandoned.
In his 1976 book, Howard Hughes, The Hidden Years, James Phelan investigates the final decade of the famous aviation billionaire. Hughes realizes his massive fame makes walking down a normal street a physical impossibility. He retreats to a dark hotel penthouse in a desert city. He covers the heavy windows with thick black curtains to block the harsh sun. He conducts all massive business over a secure telephone line. He refuses to let anyone photograph his aging face.
Think of a successful artist who achieves sudden, massive fame on a digital platform. The artist makes a heavy pile of money, but loses the ability to sit in a quiet park. The artist becomes a prisoner of their own recognizable face in every crowd. The invisible operator possesses the exact same wealth, but retains the absolute freedom to walk through the crowded market, unbothered. The public demands a heavy toll. Fame is an unpayable debt. You imagined a different outcome when you posted a picture of your expensive dinner at a luxury restaurant last night. You tagged the location and waited for the glowing screen to feed your mind cheap validation. You broadcast your specific coordinates to a crowd of invisible strangers. You invited the hungry predators to your quiet table. Total isolation stops the heavy bleeding. Navigating the modern world requires a perfect disguise. Visibility is a dangerous game. Locking the heavy door to the penthouse suite guarantees absolute physical safety. The human mind rots in the dark room without the chaotic friction of the outside world. The true master of the game does not hide in a sealed box. He builds a psychological suit of armor that looks identical to the ordinary people around him. He adopts their habits and mirrors their routines. He vanishes into the massive crowd by becoming the absolute average. In his 1999 book, Leading by Design, Bertel Torakul observes Ingvar Kamprad building the massive global furniture empire, IKEA. Kamprad possesses billions of dollars in liquid capital. He takes the public bus to work and argues with the driver over a cheap ticket. He eats cheap meatballs in the crowded cafeteria with his own factory workers. He shops for discounted vegetables at the local market near closing time. He wears a faded jacket to massive corporate meetings. Think of a massive school of silver fish swimming in the deep ocean. One fish decides to paint itself bright red to show the others it is superior. The massive shark swimming below ignores the silver millions and eats the red fish in one bite. Standing out in a crowd triggers the predatory instincts of the heavy tax authorities and the desperate thieves. The smart fish remains completely silver. The smart fish remains entirely invisible. You fell for the red paint trap yesterday when you saw your neighbor park a new luxury car in their driveway. You felt a tight knot in your chest and calculated how you could finance a better model. You let a stranger dictate your financial choices. You tried to fight a massive status war using your own fragile debt. Blending into the local environment deflects the tax collector. The gray man erases the gold. Conformity hides the sharpest sword. Riding the public bus while holding billions of dollars requires massive internal discipline. The physical temptation to deploy the heavy capital to solve minor inconveniences destroys most men. The ultimate operator eliminates the temptation by cutting the cord to the heavy vault. He realizes that possessing the massive fortune binds him to the system. He secures his absolute sovereign freedom by making himself immune to the heavy threats of the financial state. The ghost drops the heavy bag.
In his 2007 book, The Billionaire Who Wasn't, Connor O'Cleary documents the quiet life of retail titan Chuck Feeney. Feeney builds a massive empire of duty-free shops across the global airports. He accumulates billions in heavy cash. He flies in cheap coach seats and carries his business papers in a plastic bag. He transfers his entire massive fortune in the dark into an anonymous foundation. He forces every receiving hospital to sign papers. Think of two powerful men facing a massive extortion threat. The first man holds his heavy fortune in his own name. He must hire expensive security teams and compromise his daily routine to protect the gold. The second man handed his entire fortune to an untouchable trust. The extortionist has zero leverage because the second man holds zero assets on paper. He stripped himself of all heavy targets. He walks through the valley without fear. The empty hand holds the power. You sat at your desk this morning and felt angry that your boss took the credit for your heavy project. You craved the bright spotlight because you measure your worth by the applause of the room. You traded your internal peace for a fleeting moment of office glory. You want the heavy crown without understanding the heavy blade hanging above it. The system wants you performing for the massive crowd without rest. Pride builds the heaviest cage.
The crowd demands a performance because they need a target to blame when the system fails. The gray man refuses to stand on the stage. He understands that public anger is a massive force of nature that sweeps away anyone standing in the bright light. He builds a heavy moat between his physical location and his heavy capital. He allows the angry mob to scream at the empty paper corporations while he sleeps in absolute peace.
In his 1998 book, The House of Rothschild, Niall Ferguson describes the patriarch, Mayor Amschel, operating in the dark streets of Frankfurt. He builds a massive banking network across Europe by sending his 5 sons to different capital cities. He writes strict rules demanding absolute secrecy in all business ledgers. He forbids his family from displaying their massive wealth in public. He understands that visible Jewish wealth in the 18th century invites immediate physical violence from the state.
Think of a heavy military convoy moving through a dangerous mountain pass. If the convoy paints a massive bright star on the lead vehicle, the enemy snipers know exactly where to shoot. If the vehicles look like ordinary supply trucks, the enemy watches them pass without firing a single bullet. The elite disguise their massive financial movements as boring, routine transactions. They hide the heavy gold inside the dull wooden crates. The disguise protects the heavy cargo.
You printed new business cards last week with a massive title under your name. You wanted the people you meet to instantly recognize your heavy importance in the corporate hierarchy. You handed the card to a stranger and waited for their eyes to widen with respect. You begged for their validation using a cheap piece of thick paper. You attached your ego to a fake badge. The true Titan hands out a blank card. Pride invites the heavy blade.
Eliminating the fake badge allows you to operate without the crushing burden of defending your ego. The gray man never gets angry when a clerk ignores him or a waiter treats him poorly. He views the insult as proof that his perfect disguise is working. Every time a stranger dismisses him as a poor man, he smiles in the dark. He wants the world to think he is weak. Weakness is the ultimate camouflage for absolute strength.
In his 2011 book, Idea Man, Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen describes his quiet life outside the massive shadow of Bill Gates. Alan possesses billions of dollars in liquid capital. He walks through crowded technology conferences in a wrinkled shirt and cheap glasses. The loud executives ignore him and pitch their ideas to the flashy venture capitalists. Alan listens to the quiet conversations in the room and buys the best technology without facing a massive bidding war.
Think of a poker player sitting at a high-stakes table. The player wears cheap clothes and constantly asks foolish questions about the basic rules. The other players assume he is a rich idiot and try to take his heavy pile of chips. They bet aggressively and expose their own hidden strategies. The quiet player takes their money in one massive sweep. He weaponized their pure arrogance. Playing the fool extracts the heavy gold.
You interrupted a colleague during a meeting yesterday to correct a minor factual error. You needed the entire room to know you were the smartest person sitting at the heavy table. You won a tiny victory, but showed the entire office your desperate need for intellectual dominance. You made enemies over a useless detail. The silent operator lets the fool speak without interruption. They gather the heavy information and use it to win. Silence wins the
actual war is not fought for public recognition. The actual war is fought for total control of your own finite biological time. The gray man realizes that every piece of expensive metal he buys steals another hour of his future freedom. He stops buying the metal and starts buying his own heavy calendar. He refuses to attend the loud charity galas. He ignores the exclusive dinner parties. He builds a massive wall of pure silence.
In his 1989 book, The New Money Masters, John Train profiles the legendary investor John Templeton. Templeton escapes the loud noise of the New York financial district and moves to a quiet island in the Bahamas. He lives in a simple white house overlooking the blue water. He reads boring financial reports for 8 hours a day without a single interruption. He avoids the frantic energy of the heavy trading floor. Distance produces absolute mental clarity.
Think of a man trying to solve a complex math puzzle in the middle of a loud rock concert. The noise shatters his concentration and forces him to make heavy mistakes. The man who takes the puzzle into a quiet library solves it in 10 minutes. The global economy is a loud concert designed to break your absolute focus. The quiet operator leaves the noisy room to read the heavy numbers in total peace. Silence breeds the massive yield.
You checked your digital messages 50 times yesterday while trying to finish a complex project. You allowed the constant ringing to fracture your attention into 100 useless pieces. You complained about your lack of time while handing your finite focus to a glowing screen. You invited the loud crowd into your quiet mind. The Titan throws the glowing screen into the dark ocean. Disconnecting builds the massive advantage.
Disconnecting from the loud crowd severs the invisible chains of the status game. The status game requires you to constantly measure your physical worth against the people standing next to you. The gray man drops the measuring tape. He does not care if his neighbor buys a bigger boat or a faster car. He knows the neighbor is financing the heavy toys with massive amounts of quiet debt. The Titan refuses to play a rigged game. In his 2010 book, The Big Short, Michael Lewis follows the eccentric investor Michael Burry. Burry works in a quiet office in California, wearing a cheap t-shirt and no shoes. He plays loud music in his headphones to block out the outside world. He discovers the massive housing bubble by reading the boring mortgage documents that the slick Wall Street bankers ignore. He bets against the entire global economy while the loud men in expensive suits laugh.
Think of an engineer inspecting a massive concrete bridge. The politicians stand on the bridge cutting a red ribbon and smiling for the flashing cameras. The engineer climbs into the dark mud under the bridge and taps the concrete with a heavy hammer. He hears the hollow sound of a massive internal crack. The politicians celebrate the grand opening, while the engineer quietly moves his family to higher ground. The truth lives in the dark. You believed the loud politician on the television last night when he promised a massive economic boom. You watched his expensive suit and his confident smile and assumed he possessed the heavy truth. You ignored the boring numbers in your own grocery cart that proved the exact opposite reality. You trusted the bright performance instead of the heavy math. The quiet observer ignores the bright stage and reads the cold numbers. The math never lies. The math dictates that 90% of the people walking down the street are drowning in unpayable debt. They project a massive illusion of wealth to mask their deep internal panic. The gray man walks through this sea of illusions without getting wet. He does not judge the loud people in the heavy luxury cars. He views them as tragic victims of a massive psychological operation designed to extract their finite biological labor. In his 1996 book, The Millionaire Next Door, Thomas Stanley discovers that the average American millionaire drives a 3-year-old domestic sedan. They live in a middle-class neighborhood and buy their heavy suits off the rack at a discount store. They do not own a massive boat or a vacation home. They hoard heavy cash and stable index funds in the dark. They look exactly like a high school teacher or a local plumber.
Think of a massive oak tree standing in a wide green field. The tree does not waste its biological energy growing bright purple leaves or shiny golden bark to impress the other trees. It spends 80% of its massive energy growing thick roots deep into the dark soil. When the heavy hurricane arrives, the pretty flowers blow away in the violent wind. The boring oak tree stands firm. Deep roots survive the heavy storm. You spent your entire holiday bonus last year on a shiny new television and an expensive heavy watch. You wanted the immediate thrill of the bright screen and the heavy metal on your wrist. You ignored the massive crack in your foundation because the new toys distracted your tired mind. You bought the pretty flowers while the storm gathered on the dark horizon. The quiet operator uses the bonus to dig the hole deeper. Discipline denies the cheap thrill. Denying the immediate thrill is the exact mechanism that separates the absolute titan from the desperate worker. The gray man theory is not just about wearing cheap clothes or hiding behind a paper corporation. It is a fundamental rejection of the massive consumer matrix. The matrix demands that you prove your human worth through visible physical consumption. The invisible man proves his absolute worth to himself in the quiet dark. He needs zero external applause. The state and the massive corporations will continue to hunt the loud men who display their heavy gold in the public square. They will trap the proud executives and the flashy celebrities in a web of heavy taxes and endless litigation. The true elite will continue to walk past the traps in their faded jackets and their cheap shoes. They will pass the heavy wealth to their children in total silence. The ghost owns the massive world. The historical operators shared their blueprints with those brave enough to step into the absolute dark. Something on this screen is the modern version of that exact ancient act of seeking the forbidden knowledge today. Every significant financial outcome in your life followed from a choice made without complete structural vision. This is one of those crucial moments where you choose your heavy path. You stand on the seeing side.